Hey, it's Matt here from Auto 1 Browns Plains, and we're back. We've got Lockie here, and we're in the garage. We're ready to go. What are we doing today, Lockie?
So we're coming back to do some of the things that we recommended. We're coming back. Yeah, we come back to do a couple of things that we recommended from last time. We've got a set of brakes, front and rear, to do. Full auto trans service kit and some coolant, which will hopefully bring old Forrester Gump up to it's a pretty good running order. There's still a couple of things to look at down the road, but this is going to be like 90% of the work that it needs.
So the last 2 days, I've been driving the car a little bit. The power feels responsive, which is good. Hadn't had a check engine light come on, but we saw that last time and no major concerns there, but we'll double check that. Brakes actually didn't feel too bad, but we're changing brakes today. Suspension and steering is really messy on this thing, so they'll be coming soon after this video. But anyway, we'll get into it.
Alright guys, so we're getting into our first bit of repairs. We've grabbed the wheels off. We're doing things in a bit of a funky order, just because I'm a mechanic and I like to get through things fast. So we've pulled the wheel off. We're going to start draining the fluids now, and while the fluids drain and the engine cools down a little bit, we'll start doing the brakes, which gives us an opportunity to not waste so much time. First thing we're going to do though, drain the transmission pan. Lovely little 17mm bung just on the side. You don't get this sort of luxury with a lot of cars, and we're going to hope that it goes in the drain pan first try. Perfect.
Nothing but net. Alright, so we found a bit of a pain in the bum. So we've got a lock nut, we've pulled the car apart and we cannot find the key. So what are we doing, Lockie?
Look, there's a couple of things, a couple of ways you can go about this. We're really lucky in this situation that we've come down to the chop shop. They've got a special lock nut key that'll fit this. In fact, this is one of the most common styles of lock nuts. We're circular with some splines in it. But real pain in the ass sort of thing. What I would normally do in this situation is find a way to get them off. There's a bunch of tools that you can buy just to remove them, but you'll damage them in the process. And just get some normal wheel nuts. Unless you've got like a $3,000 set of wheels, there's almost no use in having lock nuts on the car. I've done the front side just to get a little bit up to speed with it. Matt's gone off and gotten us some new shiny black wheel nuts, which we'll show you in a second. But just a tip and trick before we jump into doing the brakes. Go out, if you're going to do any work on your car yourself, go out and buy a good quality set of sockets. Try and get ones which are single hex. It means you're less likely to round off the nuts. And go and get yourself a good set of spanners as well. Most of the call-ups that I get from people working on their own car is people that have rounded their nuts off. And once you've done that, it's sort of something where a mechanic can't touch it because it's a liability risk for us. And the next best option is like a thread repair person, and that's going to be expensive. So the best way to not have a problem is to prevent the problem. Get a good socket and a good spanner. So as you can see here, we've already got the front brake pads and rotors off. They're actually one of my favorite jobs to do because they're just predictable. But we've got our new rotor here from factory. 99% of these are going to come coated with some oil to prevent them rusting in transit. So just a nice high quality brake cleaner. Give it a good spray down and a wipe with a rag on both sides before you put it on. It's going to prevent the pads from glazing on the first dry. Going to give you a lot better brake feel down the road as well, prevent issues. Alright guys, so got the new rotor on, got our caliper bracket bolted back up. I just want to show you a couple of things here. Like, we can't go too in depth with these things just because of our insurance coverage, and like not every car is going to be the same. But what we can tell you is a couple of really important things. make sure that you either torque the bolts or you know what you're doing here. There is no worse thing than having a set of brakes come off of a car. Like, it's all one thing to speed up, it's another thing to need to stop. So be really careful if you're going at your own brakes at home. And then the other thing to mention is your slide pins. So on our caliper, we have this little pin that slides into the caliper bracket. This is like our number one leading cause of uneven brake wear. All we need to do every time that we do a set of brakes, pull these slide pins out, clean them off with a nice clean rag and put some grease on them. Try not to get it on your hands because it feels awful. And then just reinstall and give it a little wiggle so the grease is spread around evenly. That is pretty much it for the brakes. There's a sort of a theory out as to whether you should put a bit of grease on the ears of the pad. I'm of two minds in this situation. These have a nice little slide, metallic slide for the pads to go on. If it didn't have something like that, I might put some grease on there, but I'd try to keep grease away from the rotor and the pad material as much as possible, just so you don't have any weird brake performance down the line. Alright guys, so front brakes are in now, and we're moving on to our auto trans service. We're going to do the filter that's inside the pan today. We're going to leave this exterior one for another day. But our main concern, as from our last video, was replacing this gasket here, which is just leaking. So we've drained our fluid first, let the car cool down a bit, which is just something that is nice for us now that we're going to work on it. Putting our sump plug back in before we remove all our bolts. But just taking a second here to talk about something that's really important for a home gamer, which is torquing bolts. If you don't have a torque wrench at home, it's like a $50 investment, and it's something that's going to prevent you from under tightening something and it coming out. And if we had a bolt come out of the transmission, we might lose our oil and ruin a transmission, or over tightening something, which is going to cause us to strip the bolt, cause some damage, and we're going to really have a pain of a time getting that fixed up, either through a helicoil or something like that. Good rule of thumb is just 35 Newton meters on something with a steel press pan and 30 Newton meters on a cast alloy pan. But just look up online, there's going to be tons of documentation for whatever car you have, torque spec for sump plug on Forrester. So 35 Newton meters for me today. Torque wrench just clicks when it's at the right tension, and it's never going to leak again, and we haven't stripped the bolt. Alright guys, so just pulling our last couple of transmission pan bolts off. One more to go. When you're going to pull off a transmission pan, always hold it up as high as you can. Loosen your last couple of bolts off and see if any oil wants to come out. Straighten the pan, that's how I like. Give that a second to drain. Pull that bolt the rest of the way out. Conveniently lose it on the floor. And then pull our pan down. Don't know why it is, but even once you drain a transmission, they always keep a lot of oil in the bottom of the pan. And then we're just looking to replace this real crusty gasket. So this is like a cork rubber gasket, and as you can see, it's just falling apart, which has caused our leak. We also noticed that when we took this apart, a lot of the bolts weren't really tight, which is sort of a symptom of an old gasket as well. They sort of like shrink into the gaps in this pan as they get old. So this looks like it's had a bit of a reseal in the past, but we're going to do it properly today and do a new filter because we had a bit of a hard shifting. We also want to check for any metal throughout as we go, but we're just going to get that done and then move on to our next thing. Go for it. Alright, so that is our old transmission oil filter off. We noticed as we were pulling this off that a lot of the bolts are completely different lengths. So what we've done as we pull them off, just put them all in the new one, sort of in order. And what we'll do, probably take a photo so that even if we do forget, we can just go back and reference where they came from, so we don't make any mistakes but as we mentioned previously, we're probably looking for some little flakes of metal and crud in the filter, and as you can see, it's just a little bit fuzzy and nasty. So what we'll do is give this mating surface a good clean down, and then we'll put this new filter back in, make it all nice and shiny, and hopefully that'll sort out our hard shifting issue from our service inspection. Alright guys, so we've got our new transmission filter on the bottom of the transmission now. We'll give it a little bit clean up so it looks nice and sparkly for our photos. But we're moving on to resealing our transmission pan now. There's a lot of people out there that will use a abrasive wheel or a sanding disc on this sort of repair. I like to start as gentle as possible, so we want to get absolutely all of the old sealing material off. So I like to start with the wire wheel, just as it's the least aggressive way to go. If we need anything more than that, we'll swap to that, but usually I can get it done with something like this. Alright, so we've pulled all our stuff off. We've replaced our new transmission filter, which you can see here, nice and fresh. We have cleaned everything down as best as we can at this stage, just so there's no silicone left over from where it's previously been resealed a little bit. Cleaned down all our edges, and we're about to throw our new cork rubber gasket on. Now normally these cork rubber gaskets aren't really meant to have any sealant on them, but I know for a fact that these are going to complain with me when I put it up against the bottom of the car. So what I like to do is just put like a couple of tiny little dabs of sealant around the cork, around the sealing surface, so that when I sit my gasket over, it essentially sticks in the right spot, and there's no chance of me folding it over when I hold it up under the car. And when we fold over a gasket, pinch a gasket, that's when we actually get the problems. So a couple of little dabs of sealant, just like so. Make sure that all our holes line up, and that's probably a good case because we've got this around the wrong way. And then we'll get back to you once we've got it up underneath the car. There we go, into the white as well as your hope it will. There we go. That one started. Started, and then we can go around and run all our bolts, just so now that our gasket's not pinched in any weird ways, and all our holes line up because we put a bit of grip on it.
Hey, so we are under the Subi, and we've mounted the pan in place, and we've given it a really good clean with some brake cleaner, so nice and clean. And this is so that if we have any leaks in future, we can identify where it's coming from. So there we go, looking all nice and neat.
Alright guys, so got the car lowered back down, we've done our filter swap in the transmission, we've done our coolant drain, which we didn't show you just because it got a little bit mucky there at one point, just some old Subaru things. But I wanted to show you this handy dandy little tool that I've got called a vacuum coolant bleeder. Now normally we wouldn't use something like this on a vehicle of this age, just because of the plastics in the radiator. Some of the rubber hoses get a little bit brittle, but seeing as the surge tank is about the same height as the radiator head tank, we want to make sure that this bleeds effectively. So we're going to use this gauge, this vacuum bleeder, which will suck all the air out of the system, and then feed coolant back into this place, which will hopefully save us some trouble down the line. Also going to use a nice high quality coolant, which we picked up from the team at Auto One, and using our guard covers from our friends at Ryco to make sure that we don't scratch the paint when we run our air hoses and such over the bodywork. So right now it's going to get a bit noisy, but we'll turn on our air and we'll watch our vacuum gauge come down into the yellow. just like so. And now we can open our feed tube and we're going to watch our coolant come up, making sure that the hose never comes out of the bottle. Make sure it's right up to the top. Alright guys, so I've had Matt up in the car now. We're starting to do our brake bleed as everything else warms up. So like we said before, we're running through transmission gears, getting the coolant up to temperature. But we figured now is the best time to do our brake bleed, seeing as we're sitting around for a little bit of time. I've got our generic assortment of 8, 9, 10 and 11 spanners. I also like these little needle nose pliers just to get these stubborn boots off of the top of the brakes. These little rubber boots off the nipple. But essentially what we're doing with the brake bleed is pushing all of the old fluid and any potential air out and replacing it with fresh fluid. The fluid in brakes is based off castor oil and something else I can't quite recall. But it's got this really weird trait called hygroscopic. So it means that it sucks moisture out of the air. If you've ever experienced brake fade, it's one of the reasons for that, as the water that comes into the brake fluid from the air essentially boils at a different temperature and creates a gas in the system instead of hydraulic fluid. A gas is compressible, whereas hydraulic fluid isn't, which means that your pedal goes to the floor. So any older car, any car that's hasn't had a brake fluid change in about 2 years, we like to do this. Pretty much all we do is we get Matt in the car, pumping the pedal through, and we're opening and closing the valve here that allows fluid to come out when he pushes the pedal down, and closing it so that air doesn't get sucked back in as we go. And then we make sure that it's not leaking any fluid after we're done. Pop it down, pump it up, hold it down. Does that feel pretty good?
Yep, feels good.
Alright guys, so joining us back at the right hand front wheel, we've just finished up our brake bleed. We're about to throw the wheels back on so we can truly run through all the gears with the automatic transmission, just to give it a little bit of a test on the hoist, make sure it's all bled up properly. But just something to note with our brake bleeds before we go any further, is when you do your brake bleeds, it's really important to make sure you at least do a few passes where you open and close the valve on each pump. It's a real old school trick that I learned from someone else who learned it from someone else, but it prevents any chance at all of air getting back into the system. If you get air back into the system, obviously you're going to get a really poor pedal feel. If you've got a poor pedal feel on the track, it's just not going to be a really good experience on the track, on the road, in the mountains, whatever you like. Having bad brakes is just not a good way of living life. On top of that, so we're about to put our wheels back on. Lovely work wheels that we've got for this car. But while we were going through, we went out and got these really nice black wheel nuts. They were like $60 a set. So they're going to prevent any problems down the line that we were going to have with those lock nuts. And they're also going to look really good while doing it.
So we've filled up the auto trans fluid, we've topped up the coolant, we've done a full fill of both of those, and Lachlan's just going to run through what we go to do after that. So over to you, man.
Yeah, cool. So as Matt said, we've got some coolant in it, we've got near enough to the right level as specified by whatever manufacturer oil you use. We like to use Penrite. We are about to start up the car for the first time after doing this, but once we do this, we want to do a full bleed of the transmission system and also of the cooling system. So what we want to do is turn the heater on to high, turn the fan on to 1, make sure that the AC is off, like that. And we're waiting for the heat to come out of the vents in the cabin, and also for the fans to come on in the engine bay, which will give us a sign that the thermostat has opened up and that it's hot enough that it's switched the thermo fans on. That's our first heat cycle. We'll also check our top and bottom radiator hoses for heat, but we can look at that in a little bit. And then with the transmission, what we'll do, this is a little bit different for every car, but the Subaru is a pretty simple old transmission. So what we're going to do is just run it through each gear, holding our foot on the brake for approximately 20 seconds. We'll do that over a few times until we've gone through all the gears, and then we will, with the engine running and with the vehicle in park or neutral, check our oil level at the dipstick, and if it comes up near enough, then we'll be pretty good. Otherwise we'll add or drain a little bit of oil as needed. So let's give it a go.
So back to the coolant. So internal or external air? Does it matter?
Doesn't matter at all.
No.
So long
Sweet.
as there's heat coming out of the vents,
Yep.
you know that there's coolant in the heater box under the dash.
Excellent. Okay, very good. All right, let's give it a go. We'll get there.
All right. No warning lights on the dash yet. But we do know,
Yet.
we do know that we've got an engine light that comes on occasionally.
Yep.
We'll just start going through all of our gears. It might feel like it takes a fair while to clunk in. No, straight away. That's perfect. That is exactly what we want to see.
Awesome.
So again, 20 seconds, something like that. It's a pretty boring wait. Not a lot to talk about.
Oh, we can fast forward these bits.
Check on the weather.
Modern technology.
Go back to reverse. Pretty good shift into that.
All right, so thermo fans have come on. We've topped up the coolant again. We've done all the brakes, so we're just about ready to go for a test drive. So we spoke earlier about torquing up the sump plug, and here's Lockie. He's doing all the wheels as well. So good practice, makes it easier to get off later on. Nice and easy. Just turn it until it clicks. Okay, so we're taking it for a drive, taking the Forrest Gump for a drive, and we're going to bed in those brakes. So we're going to get up to, what do you say, about 60 k's an hour, then a hard brake.
Yep, I like to get to about 60, make sure no one's right behind us, and then moderate pressure on the brake, down to about 40. We want to do that 5 or 6 times, making sure that we don't really impede the traffic behind us. And we're also checking our shifting now that we've done the auto trans as well. And look, it's still a little bit hard on that 2 to 3 shift, but it's definitely a vast improvement over what we originally found. And when we went through the transmission pan, we found a lot of metal shavings in the filter as well. So probably not that uncommon to be a little bit tired for 260,000 Ks or whatever this is, but a little bit of maintenance really made it a lot better again.
So yeah, that's a bit of a hot tip for having transmission issues. Just change your filter and your oil, and that can go a long way. So usually that's the first port of call. Guys, thanks for coming along with Lachlan from Kashy and myself, and we're going to have some more updates on the Subaru, on the Forrest Gump. But we would like to hear some of your opinions on things that we should do. So drop them in the comments, and we'll see you next time.